welcome to yet another episode of the Constitution at Work podcast. And today I have the tremendous honor of welcoming a very special guest to our podcast, Mr. Cilliers Brink. Mr. Brink served as the mayor of the city of Tshwane. He'll tell us more about himself, and he'll tell us more about preparations for the upcoming local government elections. I must emphasize, though, to all of our listeners and to our viewers that the F.W. de Klerk Foundation is non-partisan. The goal, the aim, the objective of this podcast really is to try and get listeners, and especially young listeners, more interested in the upcoming local government elections, how they can participate, what the objects of local government are, and indeed who the people in the councils are who are meant to carry out those objectives. Mr. Brink, welcome.
Thank you, Ismail. Great to be with you.
Now, Cilliers, if I may, you are a lawyer. You've also served as the mayor of the city of Tshwane. What do you do now, but how did you get into politics from law?
Yeah, let's not overstate my position as lawyer. I was always more interested in politics than law. But I decided to study law for two reasons. The first is I looked at politicians, including Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk, the patron or the leader of your organization, and those were all political leaders who studied law. And I think that the law gives you a systematic way of analyzing facts and of formulating a position, arguing your case. So in that sense, I think law is a good preparation for public life. And secondly, it's a decent profession. It was one of the warnings that was given to me early in my life as somebody who is interested in politics is never become a mercenary. Never depend for your living on a party political salary, because you might at some point fall out with your party, or your party might fall out with you in the sense of not representing your ideals anymore. And politics isn't like, banking, where if my career at Nedbank comes to an end, I can quickly jump to ABSA. It really has to be what represents your worldview, what you are convinced about, and what you stand for. And so a profession or a business or some kind of a financial independence from politics is incredibly important. But as I mentioned, politics has always been my first love. I haven't really practiced for extended period of time as an advocate. Currently, I'm working as a legal advisor in a way that allows me to continue with my political career, and in particular, a candidacy for the Democratic Alliance to become the mayor of the Tshwane Metro.
I think that's some really incredible advice that you received. Never depend on a party for a living, because anything could happen. One of the things that President de Klerk and President Mandela embodied was a love of country, a bondage to their homeland. And so I suspect that there's a lot of passion in you for South Africa, for making South Africa a better place. But what does Cilliers Brink, the man, stand for? And I ask this question particularly in light of young people who might be listening to this, who might be seeing this, and are inspired by you. What is it that you represent? Yeah,
it's always tricky when you answer these questions with the intention of selling yourself. I think it's better just to say what you believe, and if there are folks that are with you, then they're with you. If they're not, well, at least that's useful. It's a useful way of deciding whether there's a meeting of minds. A very formative time for me was the time of the constitutional negotiations that were a turning point in South Africa. I was born in 1987. And so when I was about 4 or 5 years old, some of my first memories was my father debating the issues of where does the country go from here, the drama of CODESA, some leaders in the white community back then thought that the person who bears the name of your foundation had betrayed white minority rule in South Africa. And so those were formative conversations. And my father was one of the folks that believed passionately that we could be a successful free society, because that was the central question. You can be a successful society, but can you be a free and inclusive society as well? Can you sustain economic growth? Can you be a modern industrial economy? Can you grow the middle class without, falling into dictatorship and ethnic strife and the kind of failed democracies, unfortunately, at that stage, which had been seen on the African continent. And so a formative passion for me was to prove that we could be successful as a united country, as a union, as one South African nation, obviously diverse, with many different kinds of passions and interpretations and philosophies, but one country united by a common purpose and a shared economic interest. And I would say that is the starting point. But my belief fundamentally is in a society that places the individual at its center. Not selfishness, not individualistic isolation, but a society that can nurture the success of the individual, the freedom and the dignity of the individual, creating opportunities for people, and then more broadly, a country that can make its middle class to grow. Because that really is the defining measure of success. Getting people who have been in poverty, who have been outside of the economy, into the middle class, where they can enjoy a minimum level of success, of job security, and that is how we'll make South Africa strong and how we will give hope to people who might now be in a position where there isn't hope.
And many would say that dream, that common goal of all South Africans is found nowhere but in the preamble of the Constitution and Section 1 of the Constitution, and the responsibilities and rights then found in the Bill of Rights of the Constitution. I think that is the common thread, the common goal, the lodestar, the blueprint where South Africa should be. My two questions then for you are, has South Africa kept pace with that dream, that common goal? Have we kept alive this dream of a rainbow nation, especially among young people in South Africa today? You mentioned that we're a diverse culture, a diverse society. We're not homogenous. There's a melting pot of cultures that make up the South African nation. But have we come to terms with seeing ourselves as one South African nation, or have we retreated into our various corners? But the second thing also is, when you mention individual or autonomy or individual capacity to build one's future for themselves, I want to ask you about devolving power to the lowest common denominator. And this is where I now zoom in specifically to local government, which is your forte, your area of expertise. Do you think that we've done enough as a country to empower people and not just parties or those who control power?
So if I don't answer each one of the questions that you put, bring me back to it. So let's start with the preamble of the Constitution. The Constitution is incredibly important, but we have to realize it is a document. For constitutions to survive, you need a living spirit. And maybe that is something that individuals and foundations and political parties that promote the Constitution just have to remind themselves of. The document can be amended. Obviously, we put up all sorts of barriers to its amendment, but every part of the Constitution can be amended, provided that some majority can be mustered for the amendment. So the living, animating spirit of the Constitution and of the times is just as important as the document as it is written there. Because the nature of constitutional interpretation is at different times with different realities, it can be interpreted differently. And a lot of that depends on the politics of the time. And I want to mention one example. And I'm not sure if you'll agree with me, but I was absolutely horrified by the judgment of the Constitutional Court declaring, shoot the Boer or whatever the rendition of that is, as protected speech. For me, that is hate speech. It is as common as the hand in front of your face. But by some, interpretive trick, and I suspect the prevailing politics of the moment, those judges were persuaded that, maybe if they declare it hate speech, they wouldn't be able to control the policing of that judgment because courts don't have police forces. Or maybe they're just convinced that, no, it's perfectly acceptable to sing songs about the elimination of an ethnic group. So what I'm trying to say is, be careful of just relying on the written document, because its actual interpretation depends a great deal on the politics of the moment. And that's one thing that is seldom discussed in law faculties, is the importance of an interpretive community and the public feeling and the mood of the time. And that is very important to realize. So As to the question of one nation, it is incredibly important in a free society that people have the space to define their identity as far as possible within a framework of law. So I think it's counterproductive to try and sort of force people into expressing themselves as I'm a South African and this is what it means. We have an incredibly diverse country, culturally, geographically. I mean, even the plant life and the rocks that you'll find, the geomorphology, differs so fundamentally between Gauteng and the Western Cape that it almost leads to a different experience. So there is definitely something that brings us together as South Africans, and that includes our joint infrastructure, the state of the economy, security, those things we all aspire to. And it's important to have leadership, statesmen who realize that, who know that, listen, however people might feel at any given time, if we trade up this union of South Africa, and I'm calling it a union, it's a republic, obviously, it's a constitutional republic, but this unity of a country, if we trade that up, what is it that we get in its place? Do we know? Do we know what we're giving up? And I don't think many people who would rather want this country to be chopped up or to be, governed in enclaves pretty much understand what the implications of that are. So you have to have leadership that understand the unity, the economic unity, the shared purpose, but don't try and force people to express some kind of a shared South Africanness, because if you try and do that, that kind of coercion is probably not very useful, especially at a time when folks are suffering. And this brings me to if define the South African national interest for our own purposes, but also for foreign relations. And the number one is get the economy growing so that young people have opportunities to work, to run their own businesses, and to look after their families. And that is a uniting goal. If you look at Singapore, obviously very different, not a democracy in the sense that we are. That country went from, in the words of its prime minister, third world to first world by one unifying vision of growing the economy and creating opportunities for people. And to me, that is what political leadership should focus on. And then you have to remind me of your third question.
Well, before I do, it was on devolution to the lowest common denominator. But now that you've mentioned the economy and now that you've also referenced Lee Kuan Yew, let me ask you about this. What can local government do to help in achieving all that you've mentioned in growing the economy? And I mention this in light of the fact that when you look at our economy, the backbone of it is small and medium enterprises. Yet we find that most smaller communities like Khayelitsha and Gugulethu and so forth tend to have businesses that are operating outside of the community and not really spending money inside of the community. So what can local government be doing to achieve the goal of growing the economy?
So let me just comment on the informal economy. And the fact of the matter is that the informal economy necessarily has to exist, and it has to take on a big extent of economic activity if your formal economy isn't growing, if there isn't the opportunity for people to follow the rules and the processes to become part of a formalized economy. So we should never try and shut down the auntie who's trying to sell vegetables or fulfill some other economic activity, because that's what people do in the circumstances and in the context of a national government whose wrong policies restrict economic growth, keep out investment, and sort of extend intergenerational poverty. But what can municipalities do? I don't think it's about permitting. I don't think it's about any regulatory thing, although that comes into it. It is about supplying the basics, such as water, electricity, sound roads. If you have factories, like in the city of Tshwane as we speak to each other, in places like Silverton, big industrial center where Ford has got a big manufacturing plant, that don't have electricity for up to 10 days. Industrial operations, you can't run that stuff by putting solar panels on the roof. You need baseload electricity from the municipality, or you need some kind of another arrangement. if you have that kind of a disruption of your industries, you simply can't fill orders. You can't reliably keep people on your payroll because you don't know how you're going to get your products out to the market. And you can't expand. You certainly can't expand. If you're thinking about the basics of just getting your plant up and going again, you can't think of how do we grow? How do we explore new markets? And the same is true of water. And the same is true of unreliable roads. And the same is true of spaces that have become lawless, where there is just, informality taking over to such an extent that anything goes. And there's this sort of pattern of decline and decay, urban decline and decay. So local government can contribute to economic growth by getting the infrastructure good and reliable, water, electricity, waste collection, and showing value for taxpayers' money. Now, the immediate thing people would say is, but what about the non-taxpayers? Well, you use tax money to create the kind of enabling environment for those who don't pay income tax. But remember also, everyone pays VAT. Everyone buys. So in a sense, one, everyone in this country is a taxpayer. Two, by insisting on value for taxpayers' money, you're also insisting on value for those that depend on the state playing a developmental and enabling role to create opportunities for the poor. Because the poor don't benefit from a waste of taxpayers' money or from corruption or cronyism or tenderpreneurship.
Mr. Brink, you're saying get the basics right.
Get the basics right, but understand what the basics are. And be willing then to make the difficult decisions to get those basics right. Because everyone can say, get the basics right. But it's in the details. When it comes to making the policy decisions, then folks start disagreeing, and that's where you need decisive leadership.